What if I told you that one of the most devastating bloodbaths in royal history didn't happen under swords on a battlefield, but across the tables of a wedding feast meant to celebrate unity? Imagine candles shimmering like constellations, banquets so decadent the air smelled of roast pig and spices, laughter echoing under vaulted ceilings. And somewhere in that glittering scene, someone slipped poison into the dessert wine. Gilded goblets raised in hope became vessels of death, and an entire dynasty vanished before the dawn. Close your eyes and picture the year 1371 within the Grand Ducal Palace of John. Intricate tapestries depicting legendary hunts drape the walls, illuminated by hundreds of candles. Lutes and viols create a melodic lullaby in the background. Nobles from every corner of Europe, Castile, Burgundy, Navarre, France, clad in velvet and brocade, all here for the marriage of Princess Isabella of Castile and Prince Thierry of Burgundy. For this union, centuries of tension and warfare were to be exchanged for peace, land, and a future shaped by cooperation. The stakes couldn't be higher. The bride brought the rising influence of the Trastamaras, the groom carried Burgundy's centuries-old political heft. It was a masterstroke of diplomacy, if it went off without a hitch. But this feast would not go off without a hitch. The final night of celebration arrived, and with it came the height of opulence. The banquet hall glittered under 1,000 flickering candles, their flames dancing across walls draped in silks and heraldic tapestries. Tables groaned under the weight of decadence. Candied fruits glistened like polished jewels in hammered silver bowls. Phoenix oranges, freshly shipped from the Levant, sat beside carved pyramids of sugared figs and pears soaked in rosewater. Exotic cinnamon sticks and saffron buns steamed beside roasted swan. And wine, dark, sweet, potent, flowed like rivers from amphorae bearing the royal seals of Sicily. Goblets clinked, laughter echoed. Cloaks shimmered as dancers twirled across the marble. And when the toast came, to peace, to a new Europe, every hand was raised. It was a rare moment of unity, of hope, of future. And yet, as the glasses met lips, as the first drops of sweet wine slid down noble throats, the fatal moment had already passed. It began subtly. A few soft footsteps faltered. A nobleman clutched his chest. Then another stumbled, knocking over a gilded plate. A woman let out a gasp, then collapsed. One by one, they fell, first like a tremor, then like an avalanche. Panic didn't arrive in a single wave. It rose steadily, surging through the hall as more and more guests buckled to the ground. Physicians, many themselves guests, rushed forward with trembling hands, armed with potions and poultices that had no chance against what had been unleashed. Some collapsed from the stench of bile, others vomited from the horror. Eloquence fled the room like a hunted animal. Diplomacy, the carefully staged theater of peace, disintegrated. What was supposed to be the consummation of two dynasties turned into a cacophony of screams, sobs, and gurgling death rattles. Princess Isabella convulsed in her chair, her once gleaming tiara askew, golden hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. Her mother's cries echoed across the room like a bell tolling for the dead. Time seemed to slow, then speed up in fragments. By the first light of dawn, Isabella was dead. Thierry lingered longer, his pallor growing waxy as he drifted between gasps. But by the morning bells, he too had slipped away. The promise of a future, their future, was gone before the ink on the alliance could even dry. The grand banquet hall, once filled with music and merriment, had become an improvised morgue. Velvet draperies were torn down to serve as shrouds. Tables once laden with pheasants now bore lifeless bodies. And in the chaos, only one thing became clear. Not everyone had died. Servants were untouched, musicians, guards, cooks, those outside the noble circles, all unscathed. Not a single stable boy keeled over. Not one kitchen girl lost her breath. Only the nobles had fallen, with the elite, the power holders. It wasn't a random illness. It was precise, surgical. Whispers spread like wildfire through the ash-choked air. In the days that followed, letters crossed mountains and borders with disturbing speed. Rumors surged. An exiled court cook had reportedly been seen skulking through the castle grounds the week before. Emissaries from Navarre and Aragon were said to have made unusual, suspiciously timed payments to local suppliers. And in Castile, the finger of suspicion pointed inward toward Isabella's own blood. King Henry of Trastamara, Isabella's uncle, was no stranger to cruelty or intrigue. He had risen to power through murder and manipulation. For him, poisoning his niece to preserve his throne may have been nothing more than a strategic sacrifice. It was said he had once muttered, "Her womb could erase my claim," and those who heard it never forgot. Weeks before the wedding, he convened a secret council in Castile, attended by his infamous advisor Sancho Desma, the king's knife. And just 2 days after the feast, the palace steward was found hanging in his quarters. Officially, it was ruled a suicide. Unofficially, it was a warning. No arrests were made, no investigations were launched. The official explanation: a sudden pestilence, a stomach plague perhaps triggered by tainted imported food. But no servants were sick, no locals, no animals, only the nobles. Everyone knew better, but no one dared speak. The palace was abandoned, left to rot in silence. In the nearby town of Jaune, people refused to enter its walls. They said if you stood beneath the banquet hall's vaulted ceiling at midnight on the anniversary, you could hear music that ended in screams, a waltz interrupted by death. The place became cursed, not officially, not ritually, but cursed in the way that history forgets events too dangerous to remember properly. But the poison didn't just kill people that night, it killed trust. From that moment on, the royal banquet table transformed from a stage of generosity into a theater of paranoia. Kitchens became secured areas guarded like war rooms. Recipes were copied by hand and locked in safes. No dish touched a noble's lips without passing through at least 3 layers of inspection. Food testers were no longer expendable kitchen hands. They became elite, hand-picked warriors. Officers trusted more than ambassadors. To taste for a king was to stand between power and death. And yet the effects reached deeper still. Diplomacy frayed. Royal marriages were no longer avenues of connection. They became liabilities. Invitations were declined. Betrothals were delayed. For the first time in recorded European court history, nobles began preferring internal marriages, unions between cousins and nieces, often within dangerously close bloodlines, simply to minimize risk. It was the beginning of a trend that would later doom dynasties like the Habsburgs, whose chins were not the only things deformed by inbreeding. But in 1371, in the wake of the poisoned wedding feast, marrying your cousin seemed safer than trusting a stranger's bread and wine. It wasn't just about poison anymore, it was about the erosion of faith. The kind of faith a diplomat has when he clinks glasses with a future ally. The kind of faith a mother has when she hands her daughter into the arms of a foreign prince. That was what really died in John. Not just a royal couple, not just a room full of heirs. What died was belief in the ceremony itself. The idea that a feast could ever be safe again. And that was the most dangerous poison of all. Writers and playwrights seized the story like wolves to a bleeding fable. Ballads, many whispered in the corners of court gardens, or sung late at night by traveling minstrels, immortalized the massacre in song, verses laced with grief, betrayal, and a creeping chill that lingered long after the final note. The most popular ballad, La Noche del Vino Roto, The Night of the Broken Wine, described goblets shattering in mid-toast, laughter turning to silence, and a bride gasping for breath beneath a veil that turned crimson. The lyrics were so potent, they were banned in 3 regions before the year was out. But like all good art, suppression only made them stronger. The songs traveled further, their melody shifting with every border crossed. In Paris, the theaters brought Isabella's story to life in lavish productions, dripping with silk, candlelight, and dread. One particularly daring tragedy recast the feast as a dark morality play. In it, Isabella faces a devil disguised as her uncle, who tempts her with a chalice of peace and a crown forged in lies. The play's final scene, where she chooses love over ambition and is killed for it, left noblewomen openly weeping and bishops crossing themselves as they exited the theater. Theaters became places where people could grieve what politics forbade them to speak of. Farther south in Florence, sermons turned the tale into divine caution. Priests railed from pulpits about the sins of pride and false alliances. "Let no man feast when his brother starves," one friar thundered, "for even God's wrath has a palate." The poisoned wedding became less of a singular event and more of a symbol, a parable carved into the soul of Europe. Preachers quoted it alongside the fall of Rome and the betrayal of Christ, painting it as the moment when mankind's hunger for power defiled the sacrament of marriage. And then came the operas, centuries later, but no less haunted. One of the most infamous was L'Opera Nuptialis, The Wedding of Tears, a Baroque masterpiece whose most unforgettable aria belonged to a dying bride. As her life slipped away, she sang to the ghost of her unborn children, each note trembling with the weight of dreams undone. The opera ended not with applause but silence, a silence as heavy as the one that had fallen over June after the scream stopped. Yet beyond the stages and songs, something even more remarkable stirred. In libraries and monastic cloisters, in the quiet minds of monks and scholars, the poisoned wedding wasn't a fable. It was a lesson, a warning, a spark. One monk, Rodrigo Ferrane, penned a treatise questioning the entire foundation of royal diplomacy. How could alliances built on personal vows ever ensure true peace? He argued that without laws, without transparency, without a system bigger than any one king or queen, Europe would keep repeating the same bloody mistakes. His writings, ignored in his lifetime, would later be hailed as the first flicker of modern political theory. And then there was Inigo de Laga, a boy of 15, too low in rank to sit at the table, too lucky to die. Assigned to watch Prince Thierry's hounds that night, he entered the hall the next morning and saw his world ended. The image of noble bodies, stiff in their finery, would never leave him. He channeled his grief into writing, not memoirs, but allegories. The Feast of the Fireflies, his strange political satire, cloaked horror in fable. In its absurd tale of birds and serpents, readers found echoes of the truth. And in Inigo's hidden grief, they found courage to question. These stories, these songs, these whispers, they became the true legacy of John. Because when the bodies were buried and the feast forgotten by the powerful, art and memory carried it forward, not to punish, but to remind, to warn, because what was destroyed that night wasn't just two lives. It was an illusion that power could be trusted, that peace could be toasted without fear. And from that ruin came a new truth, whispered from stage to sermon to song. Even love must be tasted for poison. If this twisted chapter of royal history fascinated you, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe for more untold stories, and hit the bell so you never miss a hidden bombshell from the past. And now, who do you think orchestrated the poisoned feast? Was it Uncle Henry, a vengeful cook, or a secret pact among rival kingdoms? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, keep your goblets close and your enemies closer.